I would like to start by saying good morning and thank you all for being here with us today for the online launch of the report Time to Act, 2 years on, commissioned by the British Council within the context of the European Beyond Access project and authored by On The Move. I am Bettina Panagiotaara, a dance researcher and dramaturg from Athens, Greece. I have brown hair up to my shoulders. I'm wearing brown glasses and a dark gray shirt, and I'm in my early 40s. Our digital background is light gray and wavy, I might say. It features logos of the European Beyond Access project and its core partners, which are the British Council, Oriente Occidente from Italy, Per Art Serbia, Cap Nagel, Germany, Scanes Dance Theatre from Sweden, Onassis Stegi from Greece, and Holland Dance Festival from the Netherlands. It is funded by the Creative Europe program of the European Union. By describing the background, I have also named all of the partners of EBA project, that's short for European Access. As you might have already figured out, I will be moderating this discussion along with my colleague Sonia. Sonia?
And good morning to everyone from me as well. I'm Sonia Parmentier. I'm a white woman in my mid-50s. I've got long dark hair, I'm wearing glasses, and I'm wearing a dark top today. Something which is not visible are my wheels, which I am using to get around. I'm a dance artist, a teacher, and an activist from the Netherlands.
Well, thank you, Sonia. And just some technical tips that might come in handy before we delve into our discussion today. So, at the bottom of your screen, you can see the Sese button for English live captions of the event. In the chat, again at the bottom of your screen, there is a link if you want to read captions in a pop-up window. Also, you can view captions translated by artificial intelligence into other languages. It is available in French, German, Spanish, Polish, Serbian, and Italian. On the screen, you will also see both British Sign Language and International Sign. Now, during the 2 pre-recorded interviews that we are going to watch later on, there are embedded captions on the films. You can choose to turn off captions or continue to follow captions in other languages in the pop-up window. And just so you know, the chat function is active only for technical needs in case you need it. So, back to something more exciting now, back to our plan for today and our guests. So just a note that this report comes 2 years after the first Time to Act report published in 2021, keeping track of changes and offering an invaluable input on performing arts and disabilities in Europe. The first part of the event will focus on presenting and understanding the core elements of the Time to Act 2 years on report and its different perspectives. Whereas the second part will focus on how to act on challenges identified by the report and on how culture and policy professionals can implement change. The event will close with a short presentation on learning journeys, that is, digital tools for our fields. And now, I will give the floor to Sonia to introduce us to our first guests.
Thank you so much, Bettina. I would like to welcome Jordi Balta from On The Move. He's a researcher of the report we are launching today. Please, Jordi, can you give a short description of yourself before you proceed with the presentation of the report?
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. I'm a white man in my mid-40s. I have short, dark gray hair, and I'm wearing a dark blue shirt today. And it's a pleasure to be able to present today the main elements from the report Time to Act 2 years on, to which so many people have been contributing over the past few months and indeed the past few years, because this is actually the result of work done by many people over a long period of time. I'll be sharing my screen so that you can see a few of the main findings of the report. Now, the report we're presenting today is called Time to Act 2 Years On, and as its title indicates, one of the main aims of the report is to update data on the first Time to Act report that was published 2 years ago. That report focused on accessibility, inclusion and participation for disabled artists and audiences, and made particular emphasis on issues like information and knowledge. The report we're presenting now places particular emphasis on inclusion and participation of disabled artists in the European performing arts. The second objective of the report is to also analyze further in detail and with some depth some of the impacts of the Europe Beyond Access project in 3 of the countries where it has been implemented, namely Italy, Poland, and Sweden. The elaboration of this report has involved an online survey open to performing arts professionals across Europe, several interviews, and an analysis of existing evidence in this field. And as a result, the report you'll be able to read from today combines quantitative and qualitative data, and I'll just be presenting a snapshot of some of the findings we've had. As I mentioned, the report Time to Act, the one we published 2 years ago, highlighted the importance of information and knowledge in order to make progress in terms of inclusion and participation, and identified major gaps in this area. What the new report shows is that the availability of knowledge remains an important issue. And indeed, that when we asked performing arts professionals about the number of works done by disabled artists that they had seen over the past 2 years, the figures were relatively similar to the ones we had encountered in 2020. So there isn't any major shift, even though there's a slight increase in the number of professionals who had seen 7 or more productions. So what we see is that there's a group of very engaged professionals in this field, but the overall trends remain relatively similar. It's important to note that in this case, because we're observing a 2-year period that was marked by the COVID pandemic, we included the possibility of having seen performances or works online. This continuity of the trends is also visible when we asked professionals about how familiar they considered themselves with the work done by disabled artists in the performing arts. And the overall trend remains largely similar to the one of 2 years ago. 51% of the respondents said that they were not familiar or not very familiar with works done by a European disabled artist. The figure 2 years ago was 52%. So there's a very minor change there, and generally a recognition that more knowledge continues to be necessary. Now, at the same time, we observed some important positive changes. And a significant change is that when we asked only programmers in the performing arts to what extent they were planning to program works by disabled artists next season, we were surprised to find that 62% of programmers said that they were definitely going to present works by disabled artists. And there's still another 33% that said they might be doing that. Now, it's important to note that figure refers only to programmers, but still it somehow shows that there is an increasing awareness of the need to act in this field, as well as a recognition of the valuable work done by disabled artists, even though at the same time, gaps in knowledge, as we have seen, continue to be very, very important. Now, this also shows us that there are positive trends, and the report indeed presents some illustrative evidence of how new opportunities for disabled artists are emerging and how policies and structures are evolving. And we illustrated this in particular with evidence from the 3 countries under study, and you can find that in further detail in the report. But overall, what we can say to summarize this trend is that we can observe a slow paradigm change, at least in some countries, particularly in those where policies and resources for accessibility, inclusion, and the professional participation of disabled artists are available, where organizations and professionals, including both disabled and non-disabled professionals, are committed to foster change, and where collaborations between the different stakeholders in the field are established. Now, this paradigm change, to be more specific, can be represented by a recognition of the agency of disabled artists as agents of change. So they are, in some countries, being increasingly consulted, increasingly involved in decision-making, and their knowledge is positively valued. And so is the artistic value of the work done by disabled artists. And it is when this happens in which there can be a progressive integration of work by disabled artists in mainstream venues, events, and organizations. Now, another significant change, which is slowly gathering pace, and of course, all of these changes are positive, but there's still much more to be done, as we will explain in a couple of minutes. But one of the other changes we observed was how professionals, when asked what are their main sources of information, they are increasingly referring to the importance of national events, networks, and organizations. Whereas in the past, there was more dependence on European initiatives and one-off activities, there seems to be stronger structures available for accessing information at the national level. And at the same time, and particularly in order to address the regional gaps and the regional imbalances that continue to exist, the contribution of programs and projects funded by the EU, as well as European networks in the field of the performing arts, continues to be essential, because these have been very important factors in driving change and enabling the exchange of information across borders. As I was saying, there's positive trends, but there's still many challenges that remain outstanding. And in particular, we observed that knowledge and the familiarity with the work done by disabled artists remains modest, as the figures we showed at the beginning demonstrate. We also saw how there continues to be an overdependence on disabled artists and professionals, as well as specialized organizations in issues of accessibility as the information providers. So rather than information being widespread and accessible or known by everyone, there is often an expectation that it is disabled artists and professionals, as well as those organizations that have a particular expertise in this field, that are the ones on which one can rely, but that generates a lot of pressure on those few organizations. We also observed how in many countries there continues to be more attention given to accessibility and inclusion for disabled audiences than for disabled artists. So when we observe what kind of measures are being adopted to foster accessibility and inclusion, there is more frequent focus on those that allow audiences to access than artists, and which reproduces certain stereotypes of about the roles of disabled artists. And finally, and something that comes very consistently across several of the elements we examined, there continue to be very significant regional differences in terms of the awareness, the knowledge, and the opportunities for disabled artists. So across several of the variables we analyzed, countries in North and in West Europe were doing significantly better than in those in South and East Europe. We're showing it here, we're illustrating here with one of the graphics you can find in the report when we asked organizations whether they had dedicated budgets to adopt and implement inclusive policies or activities in their organizations. Now, the European average says that approximately 50% of the organization have a dedicated budget. But when we look at the breakdown per region, we observe that in Western Europe, the figure is 62%, in Northern Europe is 57%, but at the same time, in Southern Europe, it's only 42%, and in Eastern Europe, it's only 37%. And we found very similar trends when we asked respondents about the frequency with which they had adopted measures to increase accessibility and professional participation of disabled artists, as well as when we asked professionals about their familiarity with the work of European disabled artists and the number of productions by disabled artists they had presented in their venues and festivals. So that continues to be a major issue. Now, I'll leave it here, and I'll be happy to take part later in the discussion, but it's also important to remind that from today on, you'll be able to access the full report at the websites of Europe Beyond Access and On the Move, and that there's also, and the full report is available in English for the time being, and there's executive summaries available in several other languages, as well as in an English audio version and in international sign. So thanks everyone for your attention, and yeah, look forward to discussing this later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordi, for your presentation of this much needed report again. You will be back with us later for some responses to the report. And before we go to that, we will have one recorded response now, and that will be a pre-recorded interview with a member of European Parliament, Massimiliano Smirillo, and he's rapporteur on the Culture Committee at the European Parliament. The interview will be carried out by Anna Consolati, General Manager of Europe Beyond Access partner Oriente Occidente. So we can start the video, I think.
My name is Massimiliano Smirillo. I'm 57 years old. I'm a member of the European Parliament and I work on the Committee on Culture. I'm the coordinator of the S&D group. I'm 1.8 meters tall. I have glasses, a big nose, and I have curly hair, or at least I did have curly hair, a few left. I don't know if that's enough for giving you a physical description.
Great, thanks Massimiliano. As member of the Committee on Culture and Education of the European Parliament and as reporter of the Creative Europe programme, can you tell us a little about your response to the report, Time to Act 2 years on? And if something has surprised you in particular about this report, if there is anything that encourages you in regards to future prospects, or maybe something that instead has left you a little perplexed somehow or disappointed.
No, it's a very detailed report, which in my opinion captures some positive elements related to the trend of medium to long term. Objectively, there are situations that are improving. Above all, it's improving the awareness with which we approach these issues. And this awareness then becomes politics, a choice, becomes legislative or administrative procedures, announcements. So I take an element, let's say, of positive trend. On this, I would like to be more optimistic. It's clear that in the specific scene that you described, there are some contrasting areas of light, but also dark, that concern, let's say, the realities of each individual country, Southern and Northern Europe. It's important to note the fact that currently much greater attention is given to who attends performances. In other words, the spectators. And less strong attention still to be built, to be consolidated on disabled artists. So I repeat, you can observe a positive trend within which there are still problems, criticism, inattention, fragility of the system in regard to the needs. But yes, it seems to me that we're moving in the right direction.
And therefore, in your opinion, how important is it to continue with the Creative Europe projects? How much do these have an impact on national systems and institutions? How much can these projects help influence and change the more local systems? How can they ensure that the impact is disseminated so that there is also an impact and change on the ground?
We see that in some countries there already exists a heightened sensitivity, awareness, practices, good local practices. In these countries, we also see a higher level of impact and reach of Creative Europe, because it builds, let's say, on a more advanced administrative network and networks of institutions and associations. So there are also better results. I repeat, it's very clear the image that comes from your work, the distinctions between Mediterranean Europe, so to speak, and Northern Europe. Regarding this, there's still a lot to do, especially in the South, to better manage these interests culturally and also operationally. In my opinion, Creative Europe is making the right choices and it's going in the right direction. Then, of course, it is quite evident that it is needed a greater articulation and pay greater attention to individual niches, offering specific answers. In general, of course, Creative Europe is not the panacea for all evils and for all our difficulties. There's a problem of procedure, there's a problem of capacity on the ground, and there's obviously a problem of budget, and an adequate diversification of budget to respond also to the needs that you raised and emerge from the research. It's also true that this research was also possible thanks to Creative Europe's sensitivity and ability to welcome it and to give it, let's say, the appropriate tools and resources to carry it out.
Let's talk about the wider issue. I'm going to ask you for a moment to cast your gaze beyond just the funding system of Creative Europe and think more about the Committee on Culture and Education and the world of education, which is also highlighted in the report, which is the first major barrier to entry for people with disabilities that want to become artists and professional artists. If we don't open up the world of education to this, to the possibility, especially in high schools, to continue to professionalize, then it will be difficult for us, cultural operators, to imagine a different reality and role models, because these artists don't have and can't follow the same path of others. And this, at the moment, is something that involves all countries, not only of Northern Europe. In this sense, in Parliament, what are you doing?
Well, I think that's the point. The point is to try to create more and more systems with local and associative realities, with local institutions, because this new approach, the approach you propose to valorize artists with disabilities in particular, cannot be exclusively a theme that comes from above. It's clear that the European Union must play its part with concrete actions and choices, enhancing this discussion with gradually more punctual policies. But it is needed a connection with municipal, regional, national institutions, with environments, the school environment, therefore school leaders, Not only, I repeat, in an autocratic way, we need to develop a discussion which is empathetic and understanding, demonstrating to the cultural sector the data and research, the difficulties, and that it's possible to do things differently, that it's necessary to do things differently, to build a more conscious and wider inclusion space that gives opportunities for creative and professional development and education to everyone. So, Europe could do two very specific things. First, to testify in actions, policies, announcements, resources, more and more detailed choices. And second, to urge a discussion with all other stakeholders, from those most related to the world of associations and professions, and the supervision of the milestones of the European school system and education. And similarly, to encourage effective local choices in this regard. So the European Parliament has a very important role of authority and credibility.
I would like to ask you, maybe from more of a personal point of view, and precisely what could projects of this kind do? Which have an openness and transversality among countries, as you said, in which there are very different cultures and societies, and where we have noticed that, as a result, some barriers remain persistent in a likewise absolutely transversal way.
I think it would be necessary also within the European Parliament to not work exclusively on individual programs, in this case. Try to have a more integrated approach, and maybe with an action, a resolution, an initiative of the Parliament, it can be induced not only Creative Europe, which has already been welcomed and is working, but I'm thinking of Erasmus for the part of its competence, and I'm thinking of Horizon for the part of its own competence. I'm thinking of the European Social Fund for the way it actually lands in every single region of Europe. In short, don't focus exclusively on the more specific and technical aspect, which is necessary as Creative Europe, but to have the idea of a more generalized policy that could meet the social pillar, but also the whole issue of the creative and cultural industries, because the work we are doing is not just a work of social policies, but it's a job that is in between. That is, it must also be able to exploit the opportunities that social policies give us, but then transport, let's say, those needs in the most natural place, which is that of creative productions and that of cultural productions. Because we're talking about artists in all respects who encounter gigantic difficulties on their path, and the duty of the local, national and European institutions should be to remove them.
Great.
Well, much appreciated, and that Massimiliano took the time to respond to the report, and thank you, Anna, for carrying it out. So back to Sonia.
Okay, thank you, Bettina. Due to unfortunate circumstances, Michaela Dantas, who was supposed to be with us this morning, cannot be here today. So we've had to improvise a little bit. And next to Stefana Secreto Aguilar, who's the network coordinator of Circostrada from France, we will have Ben Evans, Head of Arts and Disability of the British Council, to share with us their thoughts on the report. Thank you for being with us. And maybe your thoughts on the report go along the same lines that we've just heard from Massimiliano Sbirrillo, but maybe they're going into a different direction. Please, Stefan, can you share with us your thoughts on the report from your perspective as a network coordinator of Circo Strada?
Definitely. So, hi everyone. My name is Stefan. I am the coordinator of Circo Strada, the European Network for Contemporary Circus and Outdoor Arts. I am a white Mediterranean man in his very early 40s, black hair, black beard, wearing glasses, and a dark gray shirt today. First of all, thank you for this invitation, both to the British Council and On the Move. And also thank you and kudos for the clarity and quality of the report and the methodology to both Jordi and the team behind it. I was very happy and glad to read this report only 2 years after the first one. And specifically, I'm very happy to be one of 2 official respondents, because otherwise I might have probably only read the introduction, the conclusion of it. There are lots of very interesting key figures and different perspectives in the report that help you really understand such a complex issue. It makes it easier to get into it, especially with the focuses on the 3 countries, Italy, Sweden, and Poland. As far as the positive or encouraging takeaways, what I bring home is the fact that there is more awareness, that there is more quote unquote curiosity, and there is more willingness to act, to change, to shift. And that's also where I stand. As far as the, let's say, to be worked on takeaways, what I would like to share with you this morning is how effectively we can translate these positive and encouraging elements into sustainable policy frameworks with dedicated budgets, of course, and how do we transform activism and bottom-up initiatives into standard processes. Of course, I don't have an answer to that, and I know it's a complex and slow process. Something else that I wanted to share, nothing new, but still food for thought. What strikes me is the enormous gaps between EU regions and countries, and also the countries themselves. The other point that I want to mention is also the intersectionality of this topic with other forms of oppression, and also how we can navigate both this, let's say, geographical cultural gaps with the intersectionality aspect, while also rethinking touring models and cross-border performing arts presentation, without forgetting, of course, the digital component. Last but not least, what I was interested in was how to create or provide flexible yet contextualized answers, tools for a wide range of policymakers, curators, programmers, artists, technicians, any cultural worker in the field, without compromising on the vision, the ambitions, and the values that I think we all share in this room. I'm very curious about the next steps. And in the meantime, I can't wait to share the report with both the members of the network and the communities at large of contemporary circus and outdoor arts workers. And if I have a wish for the future, if I'm allowed to have a wish for the future, I would love for another report to come out in the next 2-3 years, maybe. And that Time to Act 3 would also include a clear set of policy recommendations, both flexible and contextualized, and that could be used at both national and EU levels. So that's my initial response that I would like to share with you this morning.
Thank you so much, Stefan. A lot in there again. Before we go to some questions, I would like to ask Ben first as well. And Ben, from your perspective as Head of Arts and Disability from the British Council, could you please share your insights with us?
Yeah, thanks, Sonia. And I think also as project director of Europe Beyond Access, which is a real privilege. My name's Ben Evans. I'm a tall white man in my mid-40s with short brown hair and a ginger beard. It's interesting listening to Massimiliano Smerillo. My reading of the report feels more urgent, and I don't know if that's because I've read it differently or I'm an advocate, an activist rather than a politician, but I feel a more urgency in the report than Mr. Smerillo expressed in his response. On knowledge, I think if I hadn't read the original Time to Act report in 2021, I would be more shocked than I was, I think. That the results of that first report took a long time to digest, simply the lack of knowledge in the cultural sector. So I'm not surprised, though I remain depressed to read that 52% of respondents indicated they still have poor or very poor knowledge of artistic works by disabled artists, and that 1 in 7 promoters and programmers have not seen any work by disabled artists over the last 2 years. And in Eastern Europe, that's almost 1 in 5. And this is, in my opinion, is despite the hugely greater availability of works by these artists, not only in international circulation, but online, as you mentioned, Jordi. And I think seeing the work is key in my experience across Europe is that where programmers and artistic directors see the quality and complexity of the work and begin to understand the aesthetics, the politics, and the innovation of the work by disabled artists, that change finally takes place. I think there's some good news. It seems that the group of promoters and programmers with more knowledge have become even more knowledgeable, as you said, Jordi, with I think it's 20% of respondents saying they had seen more than 7 production over the last 2 years. And then right at the other end of the scale, the number who have seen no works has got smaller. It's still 1 in 7, but that's better than 1 in 6 back in 2021. But I think the major issue is this majority of programmers who have only seen 1 or 2 productions, and that number remains the same. At the same time, that group of programmers also name in the report a very small number of artists and companies as the ones they've seen. And I think we all know their names. Claire Cunningham, Chiara Bersani, Dan Dora are all quoted. And this suggests to me that programmers are not following up their curiosity. They're not researching the wider sector. They're not seeing more work. Because, Jordi, you highlighted 62% of programmers are planning to program disabled artists in the next season. And although I'm sure Claire, Chiara, and Dan would be delighted, it seems that there is a lack of rigor to the research of programmers. How to move beyond one-off tokenism is my question. I think there's an interesting question here around consultation with disabled artists and specialists in the report. The report shows that the primary source of access information remains disabled artists and companies, and that was the same in the original Time to Act report. Yet the report also notes that it's often the same small numbers of organizations who are asked for this knowledge, and they feel overwhelmed at times. And in my own words, every disabled artist becomes an access advisor. And I think just as we don't ask a non-disabled choreographer to take their precious creative time to advise us on our box office protocols, why do we ask individual disabled choreographers to teach us how to welcome disabled audiences? Of course, disability advocates spend much of their time saying, please consult with us. Don't do something for us, but do it with us. but there are specialist service providers, training organizations and tools. I would say pay access advisory specialists to advise, pay artists to make great art. Finally, one of the things I take away is that investment works. It's very humbling to read the analysis of the impact of Europe Beyond Access and also other projects. And the report provides clear evidence that long-term, large-scale investment in the work of marginalized deaf and disabled artists can have a major regional, national, and international impact on our cultural ecosystem. Europe Beyond Access proves that by providing significant investment to targeted actions, arts funders and policymakers are able to effect change. They do so whilst contributing to the creation and circulation of high quality artistic works. They do so whilst contributing to greater knowledge levels in the cultural sector, and through targeted actions, they contribute to greater engagement in the arts by disabled people as audiences and visitors. So those were my key thoughts on reading the report.
Well, full of information there again. And while we're preparing this whole event, we also asked our respondents to if they had any specific questions for the researchers of the report. So going back to you, Stefan, what would you like to ask Jordi? And Jordi, would you give him an answer, please?
Thank you so much for the opportunity of asking questions. I have actually dozens of questions, but I don't think I have a lot of time to ask all of those. But there is one very urgent question that I would like to share with all of you. Allow me to read it so I don't miss any information. In the report, it says that, and we mentioned this quite a few times this morning, that the level of knowledge of works by disabled artists remains low. 51% of professionals surveyed say that they're not very familiar or not familiar at all with this work. This figure is very similar to the one of the previous report, which was 51%, okay? So this means, as far as I understand, that although programmers are expressing an increased interest in programming disabled artists, their knowledge of available work in this field needs broadening. So this is the context of my question. Here comes the double question that I wanted to ask you. What would be the best incentive for programmers beyond having a dedicated budget? Question number one. And question number two, how do we have to consider the seemingly contradiction between the 62% who are planning to program work by the disabled artists and the level of knowledge of their work, which is 51%? I hope it's clear.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stefan, and thanks also, Ben, for the feedback. And I think I'll start with your last remark between the paradox of let's say respondents saying they only have limited familiarity and knowledge, and at the same time that willingness and engagement to program more. And I look at that in a positive light by saying what we are seeing is a recognition of the fact that there is interest in the work done by disabled artists, that there is a value in programming it, and at the same time a certain recognition or recognition of modesty of let's say the fact that programmers admit that they need to know more, and therefore there is a gap to fill. And that leads me to the other point you were asking, which is what would be the best incentives. And I think what the report provides is evidence of how things are moving forward in certain contexts. And what we are observing is that in some countries, let's say the figures are higher, there is better knowledge, and there are more opportunities for disabled artists. And I think at the basis of these lie, firstly, as we've emphasized, the importance of the availability of knowledge, that there's in the form of publications, showcases where people can access work by disabled artists. Also the importance of networks at the national level and at the local level. I mean, I think one of the distinctive elements of the countries where more progress has been made is that there are platforms that allow artists, programmers, venues, policymakers to be brought together and to address the gaps and at the same time to enhance knowledge. So we have evidence of that. We also know, and I think it's important to say so in a European setting, that the role of European networks such as ITM, Airwaves, and others, as well as the role of EU-funded projects such as Europe Beyond Access, is critical as well in order to allow, in particular, those countries where there's less opportunities to have access to work by disabled artists. And then finally, I think there's two very important issues which underpin all of these. One is the recognition that we need stages that are more representatives of their societies. We need to see people on stage that are more representative of the society where they are based, and that goes hand in hand with the recognition that disabled artists should have equal rights, and that let's say they should have the same level of opportunity as would be applicable to other artists, and that this will ultimately result, and I think it was Ben who was saying that, in more diverse aesthetics and more opportunities for innovation in creation and production. And then the second very important underpinning aspect is the availability of dedicated policies and budgets to foster change. So I think all of this, which is of course is a lot, but as I said, one of the things that is remarkable from the report is that we have the evidence of how progress can happen. And the key now is to make that more systematic and more widespread.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, you beat me to it, Stefan. Thank you so much, Jordi. And as we were all preparing, and also with Bettina, and we also came up with a sort of question which was maybe more looking forward and more looking to the future. Maybe Ben, you will do the honor to ask that to Jordi.
Yes. So thinking about progress, what we hope is progress. You've been working on these statistics, since 2019, and we started with the work on Time to Act 1. What should we be measuring, in your opinion, as we try and gauge progress in this area? What are the key metrics that you would recommend that we keep measuring, and perhaps that other policymakers on a national level who may be listening to this right now, what should we be measuring in order to gauge change and progress?
Yeah, thanks for these. And indeed, I mean, we've all been saying that knowledge remains central, and we need to continue to make progress and make data available at the local, particularly the national level, and to make that comparable. And I think it's important to combine both quantitative and qualitative data in this respect. I mean, I think among the main areas that we need to have more information on is the obstacles to accessibility and participation. Things like how many venues or festivals are accessible to everyone, and what's the representation of disabled artists in those venues and festivals. We also need to have more information about the budgets dedicated to accessibility and inclusion. That's one of the things that we are aware. I mean, let's say the report provides information on, say, how many organizations have a dedicated budget, but we don't have details about the amount of resources we're talking about. So that's an element that ideally should be addressed. And then I would also say we have not directly examined the difficulties encountered by artists with different kinds of disability. We're talking very much in general terms about disabled artists. We're not examining the particular implications of different types of disabilities. So I think this is also something that we should address in the future. And I also take Stefan's point earlier about, say, the need to be better at formulating policy recommendations. So I think from a more both quantitative and qualitative point of view, probably a closer analysis of policies and measures in this field should also be necessary, and that would allow us to build policy recommendations.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jordi. We really appreciate you also took the time to have some responses to the questions that were all going around while we were all preparing this. So I would also like to thank Ben and Stefan for your responses, and I'll be passing the word on back to Bettina, who will guide us through the second half of the event.
Well, hello again, and thank you, everyone. I think it was the discussion we just heard was quite packed with important thoughts, proposals on the report and its findings. So we had a lot of things to consider in the future. So in this second part, we are going to focus on the challenges highlighted in the report, starting with a pre-recorded interview with Judith Widdicok, who is an acting head of unit in Creative Europe, European Commission. And the interview is carried out by Ben Evans from the British Council. The British Council, as you already know, is a core partner of the EBA project. So enjoy the interview.
Good morning, Ben. First of all, I would like to say that I'm very happy to be here today to have a conversation with you on the release of a second report on performing art and disability in Europe as the acting head of unit for Creative Europe program. And to reply to your question, I can say that I'm a middle-aged woman with shoulder-length brown hair, brown eyes, and today I am wearing a white jacket. I wanted also to mention that our conversation is really timely because today is the second day of the European Theatre Forum organized by the Commission in Opole at the Jan Kochanowski Theatre. This forum aims at building a new roadmap for making Europe's theatre sector more sustainable, equitable, and better equipped to face the current and future challenges. And during this forum, we will have many panels which will be organized, among which there will be one panel focusing on digital accessibility, inclusion, and green strategies. And this panel will touch on artists and disabilities with Magda Romanska, a Polish-born dramaturg and performing art associate professor, having written many articles about the situation of disabled artists. So I strongly encourage everybody to listen in these interesting discussions. And there will be a recording session on Saturday for the end of this event.
Thank you. That's really great to know. And thank you for letting us know about it. And thank you also for your time in reading this new report, Time to Act, 2 years on. And simply to start with, we wanted to ask you what your observations are about what the report says around the cultural landscape for European artists with disabilities, or what it says about the knowledge and lack of knowledge amongst Europe's mainstream cultural managers and promoters, and really how do you respond to the report?
First of all, I would like to thank you for the impressive work that has been done for the production of this report, which gives a very complete and informative picture of the cultural landscape of European artists with disabilities. In fact, it depicts a very contrasted situation with some progress, but still a lot of efforts to be done. some improvements can be noted in the number of works seen. For example, 45% of survey respondents mentioned that they have seen between 1 and 3 productions involving disabled artists in the last 2 years. It is a very good result, even if it is mentioned also that these works are shown only on an irregular basis. And also we see some regional disparities, which is a little bit a concern. What I've seen also as a progress, which is extremely important, is the recognition of the artistic value of disabled artists, and also a stronger networking and collaboration, specifically cross-border. And I think this is really thanks to the work of the project. I see also some concerns, so still too low accessibility budget for scenes in the organizations. Only 50% of the organization have this budget, and also still some efforts to make on the knowledge of works by disabled artists.
Yes, and you're right to point out this contrast in the report around the evidence. As you say, the report does identify some key challenges, barriers, and knowledge gaps. And of those, I wonder if you can suggest which of those the European Union, through the Creative Europe programme, has a role to address. How might the Creative Europe programme contribute to bringing down those barriers?
I think that we can help by reinforcing the actions already in place. They are mentioned in the report: the networks, the platforms, and also the cooperation projects. Networks have a key role to play in providing information on disabled artists and disseminate it in the networks. I would like to mention specifically the work of the IETM, which was huge to share best practices, also to develop strategies for making the arts more accessible to audiences with disabilities, and to provide support and resources for artists with disabilities, such as information on accessible venues, funding opportunities, and training programs. Platforms also have a role to play to promote emerging disabled artists. This has already been done. For example, the platform Fedora has awarded several prizes to projects dealing with disability. There was this Platform K project of dance training with people with disability. And more recently, in 2022, the Digital Prize was given to a project called Sound Voice, which was co-created with interdisciplinary partners in healthcare, technology, and science research, and which involved people who lived with the experience of voice loss. For the cooperation project, I think it's extremely important that we continue having such projects because they can encourage the exchange of good practices to reduce the regional disparities between northern and western part of Europe on the one side, and eastern and southern part of Europe on the other side. And we can see also some progress. In 2022, we have 19% of our cooperation projects, which we have indicated social inclusion as first priority or second priority. So this is really an increase. And I would like also to mention our new permanent action, Culture Moves Europe, which follows the pilot project we had, Hypertonus, which is a mobility program for artists. And in this action, we have put in place a special top-up to support artists with disabilities so that they can go on individual mobility. This top-up can be of up to 100% of the travel and daily allowance, depending on the specific needs. So for the moment, we have seen only a few and maybe too few artists having already benefited from this top-up. And we have noted also that some artists who have mentioned in their application form that they were disabled have not asked for it. And this is something that we think we should look into to try and understand why, and also maybe adapt the scheme if need be.
It's so great to get that overview of the different ways that the program has responded, and it's great to reflect on Culture Moves Europe. I know the disabled artist who was the first to benefit from Opportunis, and has gone on to hugely impact her career as a dance maker. And yes, certainly there's something that we can do as organizations to share that with more independent artists. I suppose one thought is that for artists who've been knocking on a door for many years that feels closed, rather than just unlocking it, we all have to put a big sign outside and really encourage people very clearly through communication to say that this is there. So thank you for mentioning that in this discussion today.
You're welcome. And I just wanted to mention that for Culture Moves Europe, we have worked a lot in designing the program, the action, which is now stable with the calls open on a regular basis, on an annual basis. But now we need to work more on communication and to, as you said, to let people know, disabled artists know that these specific mechanisms exist and that they can benefit from it.
At a recent meeting of the European Arts and Disability Cluster, those changes or that new top-up fund at Culture Moves Europe was really applauded. But I suppose one question was, is there a way that a similar top-up clear access budget lines can be included in something like the cooperation projects or platforms or networks, where currently access costs are not identified and currently those costs are included within the overall artistic budget? Is there any way that that could be looked at, do you think?
For the moment, the platform networks and cooperation project, they work with a system of lump sum, for which, of course, those costs are eligible. And I think we should look at the results that we will get for Culture Moves Europe to see whether there will be an added value to have this top-up also for the other actions, or maybe just to encourage more platform networks and cooperation projects to include these aspects in their project and to let them know that this is eligible. They can, in the structure that we have for the moment, they can have this cost reimbursed, but maybe it's not sufficiently advertised. So we will look into that carefully.
Oh, thank you. I think it was one of the key recommendations of the cluster meeting, but it would be great to know that that was being looked at. And I think this links to the point you made earlier on, which is around the mainstream networks, the key role that networks and platforms play. And that was identified in the original Time to Act report, where national information was lacking. The often European platforms and networks were seen as so key. And I suppose reading Time to Act 2 years on, we at Europe Beyond Access were very humbled by the positive report of our work, but we also know that our project is fully focused on the work of deaf and disabled artists. And I think the question coming from many of the artists we work with is how to ensure that they can enter into the mainstream cooperation projects, the mainstream platforms, who maybe not doing a disabled focused project, and then maybe have never thought of that a disabled artist would apply and be accepted based on the artistic quality of their work. So it sounds as though that feels like an important factor for you. And if it is, how can you encourage, persuade, insist with those mainstream projects of the European Union that more care is taken?
In 2024, we will have the renewal of the calls for the platforms and the networks, which are multi-annual actions. And I think it's really timely for us to reflect how to better insert these priorities in the way we will draft the calls, so we can encourage more these in the application, that it's better reflected and taken into account, so that, as you said, it becomes mainstream. It's not only a project that specifically focus on disability, but that project can also understand the added value of having a better representation of the diversity of the artist, and the added value that they can bring to the project. And I think that what was mentioned in your report about the recognition of the artistic value of disabled artists can really play a role in this. So the ways we can do that is first by better reflecting it in the calls that will be launched in 2024, and also building the capacity and raising the awareness specifically of our Creative Europe desks, because they have a role to play in supporting the applicants, and in helping them including this aspect in their application.
One last question, if I may. One of the big challenges identified by the report and by so many of the artists we've worked with through Europe Beyond Access has been the lack of access to professional cultural education. Now, that's not the remit of Creative Europe, but of course, very helpful, I think, is that Creative Europe fits under the Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. So there's a strong possibility of working there. Is there a way that your team, who've been doing so much to increase the knowledge and awareness in your programs, can work closely with other colleagues within the Directorate General to explore this really shocking fact that deaf and disabled artists almost never can access cultural education right across Europe, really?
Yeah, no, I think this is a very important point, and we have seen that sometimes we work a little bit too much in silos, even if culture and education are in the same Directorate General. We have to make more efforts to integrate this. And I think that the Erasmus Plus program can offer a lot of opportunities. So we will see with colleagues how to integrate this, because I think it's key as a barrier for disabled artists, and it's extremely important that they can have access to education program. I've seen also another interesting aspect that is described in your report, which is the lack of representation of disabled artists in decision-making process. And the absence of recognition as experts. And I think that on this, we have to help by giving the tone at the top and ensuring that in our evaluation panels, there's a better representation of disabled artists and professionals. For the moment, we ensure very carefully gender and geographical balance and also a mix of competencies of the experts. But I think that this aspect should be reinforced. And for the cooperation project, networks and platforms for which the calls will be launched in 2024, and also for the Culture Move Europe, I think we can have a look at this to make this possible.
Thank you. That's a really important point, and one which I know many of the policymakers and funding bodies across Europe are looking at now, the juries and external experts and the diversity there. So it's great to know that that's something you're looking at. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, much appreciated that Judith Liddecock took the time to respond to the report. And as always, thank you, Ben, for carrying it out. So ready now for our next panel, which takes over from this interview, emphasizing the challenges highlighted in the report, and especially the regional disparities noted between West and North Europe and East and South Europe, which is also why we have with us today cultural workers from different regions with different local experiences. So let me welcome and introduce our panelists. Do you have your cameras on? Could you please all turn your cameras on? Thank you. So we have Kaya Tvenenjorem, Senior Advisor on Infrastructure and Diversity, Arts and Culture in Norway. We have with us Mia Helenius, Artistic Director at Skånes Dance Theatre, which is an EBA partner from Sweden. Christos Papamichail, Founder and Director of Liminal Access, providing access services, education activities and professional productions in Greece. We have Filip Polak, artist, producer and activist from Poland. And we also have Marie Lesure, director from On the Move, which is an international cultural mobility network, and one of the report authors. While we were preparing for this discussion, we formed with Sonia 2 main questions to be posed to our panelists. And these are taking into consideration your own experience as cultural workers in the field. Could you share with us a positive and a negative aspect of the research that relates to your working experience and highlights the findings of the report? How do you think people in a role like yours can influence and help reduce the challenges mentioned in the report? So these were the questions. And Kaya, would you like to go first?
Hello, everyone. So nice to be with you. I am a white woman in my late 30s. I am kind of Scandi blonde, and I'm wearing a golden shirt today to brighten up my bureaucratic office. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here. As mentioned, I'm a senior advisor at Arts and Culture Norway, which is the formerly called Arts Council Norway. We're the main body implementing cultural policy in Norway and also support artistic projects all over the country. The last couple of years, we've had a key focus on artists with disabilities in the Arts Council because, to be very honest, a couple of years ago, we were at a very low knowledge level and a low understanding. So we've done quite some work the last couple of years in Europe Beyond Access, and the Time to Act report. And this one has been kind of very important in both benchmarking our own work and seeing what's going on in Europe. So really, thank you so much for taking the time, having the opportunity to reflect on this report. It's on what has happened and also what has not happened, and to kind of also reflect a bit on our own process. So a positive and a negative while reading the report. As many of you have already mentioned, it is good to read that there is some notions of change happening in Europe, and that the great artists and few kind of very important organizations are heading this change. Our own research here in Norway that was just conducted shows many of the same signs, that there are signs of change and that the artists are at the kind of at the center of this change. However, I'm supposed to say positive, but the barriers and the challenges are still extremely large. But we see a difference even just, you know, from 2 years ago in Norway, where this wasn't that much a topic of conversation, to a couple of weeks ago, we had a large conference really gathering the art scene in Norway. There was some serious FOMO, or fear of missing out, going on, because these amazing artists are not that well known in certain parts of the country and in institutions. So there's some change, but I reiterate Ben's notion that there's the urgency of kind of institutional and structural change is very much still happening. So that brings me to the kind of also the grimmer note reading the report, which echoes the research that we just did in Norway, where education and a lack of understanding in the welfare sector were the two largest and most prominent barriers mentioned by all the artists that were spoken to, as well as the institutions themselves, acknowledging this kind of severe knowledge gaps in both educational facilities from a very early age onto kind of the whole kind of value chain of the educational system, as well as kind of a welfare system that does not recognize, that does not understand the arts sector, nor do they have structures and systems that enable, good compatibility. So we've started collaborating a bit with the welfare sector and also the education sector here in Norway, and that's something that we're keen to work further on. So how can people in a role like myself in the arts as an arts funder play in terms of what the report says? Well, funding is outlined as a key challenge in the report, and as an art funder, it is obvious that we have a role to play there. Arts and Culture Norway, for instance, administer many grants to artists and institutions in Norway, and we've had to a couple of years ago admit that they're not extremely accessible. So there's a whole lot of work that has had to be done, and we like to think of it as like the value chain of grants. So we've been working both with the way we communicate our grants and the way that the decision-making committees are formed, the diversity that's on them. We've had webinars in terms of challenging their notions of quality, and to, of course, there's always not that many funds, but to ensure that funds do come out to ensure really that more people can be creators in this sector. So just we've one kind of key thing we've done is to work with it's one small thing, because again, this is a large scale kind of issue, but we worked together with an Arts Council committee with a grant to encourage recruitment of artists and cultural workers in the sector, which is also, based on the Time to Act report, the pivotal role that hiring has in this sector. But this is one grant, and we've learned a lot from it, and now it's about transforming that to the other grants. Yes, and just before I know my time is up, but changing the structures and the mindset is something that we as art funders within our own systems and also together with the sector need to work on. There's always more to be done that, and that is really, really key to engage. I just came from a meeting with top management here at the Arts Council, and really understanding that from top management to communication, HR departments, we all need to be on board in order for this to really have effects. I think that was already 5 minutes.
Yes, it was a bit more, but I can understand it was too, it's two huge questions in a way. But still, I find it very useful that we can shift from a report that is more general into specific examples from people who work in the field in different countries. So this is something that is really happening. It's just not letters on a paper. That's what I mean. And how about we go on with Mira? So thank you, Kaya. And back to Mira.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It's really wonderful to be part of the launch of this important report. My name is Mira Helenius Martinsson, and I am the CEO and Artistic Director of Skånes Dansteater in Malmö, Sweden. And as stated, we are one of the partners in the European Access Project. I am a middle-aged a woman with fair skin and a light chestnut-colored hair that I collected to my neck today. And today I'm wearing a white hoodie together with a light lime green jacket. So to react on the questions from our local perspective, it may be nice to know that Skånes Dansteater is a mainstream contemporary dance institution with 20 dancers, including our 3 interns. And one of our dancers is a wheelchair user. And besides the productions that we present, we work actively with non-professionals, and we provide workshops or create opportunities, for example, for people with disability. The method that we use here is called iDance. And we have also educated 2 external leaders with disability to support us with this specific concept. So as we could read from the report, this Creative Europe project has been significant for us. European Access has, for us, for example, provided a regular possibility to organize a festival called Dansfunk, where the industry has come together locally, nationally, and internationally to share and learn about relevant topics. We have also been able to invite international guest performances by disabled choreographers to Malmö. We hosted few residencies and provided opportunities for disabled choreographers to work with our communities, for example, our amazing 60+ team, or hybrid teams of professional or non-professional dancers. We also started organizing relaxed performances and got quite nerdy about audio description on the way. And the list goes on, of course. But a dedicated budget has been really essential for the success and the exposure. The work of disabled choreographers or performers have been part of the programming, and we like to think of it something that it's part of the work and not something we do on the side. With this said, the dancers in the ensemble, they are all familiar and engaged in the work with different communities. And we have together learned about the language. We have tested methods and enjoyed performances by and with disabled artists. The learning is constant. And when the audience and staff and the colleagues in the industry and the decision and policymakers get exposed to the work, that's where the magic happens. We have, of course, also faced some challenges, and related to this, it's maybe important to know or relevant to mention that I think it's important to provide all of our dancers a different kind of methods and artistic processes. Every production should lead into deeper understanding of humanity, our individual strengths and our challenges. And the dancers of Skånes Dansteater should feel like home in different types of productions, and they should have a wide toolbox of competencies. So in this environment, our wheelchair dancer, Madeleine, also works with non-disabled choreographers and has also choreographed for an able body. And even if we prepare the creative team, Madeleine has had to possess the endurance to always share in quick trust, explain, and even defend her process and needs. She makes the translation of the movements and gives time to her colleagues to interact with her and her chair. We have a constant flow of new colleagues that have never worked with a wheelchair user before, so it's kind of a never-ending story with the introduction and the quick trust. Madeleine also works only part-time, and the rest of the colleagues, they work full-time. So we are still figuring out how to provide the best practice for everyone involved. I see this as a very active learning curve, learning by doing, basically. We have also tried to have a second cast for Madeleine in different ways. One time we had another world-class wheelchair dancer learned the work, and in another production, an able body dancer translated the movements from Madeleine to her body. But we also have repertoire that only Madeleine can dance, and this is fragile, and we of course need to cancel when she's not feeling well. And she misses her peers internationally, and therefore a project like this, European Access, has been excellent. I mean, it has made possible for her to interact with inspiring colleagues in the studio. The pandemic was also an interesting period for us, for someone who is in the risk group. We were wiping the door handles and cleaning the bathrooms before Madeleine entered the building after everyone else left. She had to work on her own in the studio with the choreographer digitally participating from another country. And for sure, a challenge again that demanded great engagement and resilience. We do have an accessible building. This is amazing and all great, but the touring with the wheelchair user is a challenging, like the report stated. I see this as a collective work, and we need to all push for the change. Also in Sweden, it's not only the higher educational institutions that need to be open to disabled people, but we need to work with the wide community already from the young age, like previously stated. So people like me, people with power positions, we are the key players, and we need to together work for the accessibility and participation of disabled artists. We need these networks, peer-to-peer learning, prioritized budget and time. The work, in my opinion, will not get done if we really not pragmatically just engage ourselves into it. We need to be brave to make mistakes and then brave to correct them. And maybe, like Ben already said, maybe a bit of curiosity will also be needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mira. And it's great that we have people coming from different, let's say, institutions, organizations, because Cannes Dance Theatre is a dance company, whereas Kaya speaks from another position. And thank you so much for that, and how everything you say relates with what we've already heard. I would like to pass on to Christos now, so he can also share his experience. Hi, Christos.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be among you. I'm Christos Papamichail. I come from Athens. I'm the director of Liminal Access. I'm a white, bald man on my mid-30s, and I have a brown to blondish beard. I wear a green t-shirt and also a huge gamer's headset. I am happy to have on my hands and be able to study the second report. It has been a tool through our work. Since the first report, we have been using it and referring to it a lot. We have been suggesting it to partners and colleagues to study and see the results, because it's a useful tool for us to have visualizations and numbers of what we are trying to explain and say. So for the for the questions, I was thinking on the positive aspects of the report, and I will try to keep it national. I think that we also experience an intention and a growing interest through inclusion and accessibility. And this is a very good sign, but there is a huge interest without knowledge. And that links me to the negative aspect that we are experiencing here in Greece. There is no knowledge, and this is also connected with the resources, the lack of resources. And I'm not only referring to budget resources and money and funds, I'm also referring to knowledge resources. There is no access to information. There is not a visible and a very accessible, at least on our side, way for anyone who is interested to expand their organizations or festivals or practices towards accessibility and inclusion to easily navigate and implement then any changes that they would like. So I will stress the lack of knowledge and the lack of education. So we have seen great Greek disabled artists struggling to get experience, struggling to get equal access to participation, just to create. We have no accessible venues besides some very few examples. And this is making, I think it was said before as well, this is making the creation by disabled artists very difficult. And usually we are working just to secure the basics and not to create, not to explore the creative formats that we want to implement. On our side, as Liminal Access, what we are committed to do and we are doing is to provide accessibility services, educational programs, and produce our own works. And for the next years, what we are engaged to is to be engaged in more international exchanges, because we have seen that broadening the horizons of our community is very impactful, and not to forget that this is one of the few ways of sustainability that we get on our hands. As in Greece, I don't know how many of you are familiar, the environment, we could say that is somehow hostile for the creative and cultural industries. So interconnections within European Union, it's a source of knowledge and budget as well. And we are very happy to see these reports and these results and be part of this community. And thank you again for the invitation, because I believe that by connecting and sharing information, challenges, and best practices, it's the only way that we could go further and forget the challenges as something, just to rephrase, stop seeing those challenges as something that is forbidding us to move on. That is something that we cannot fight. Thank you.
Well, optimistic. Thank you so much, Christos, for that. And you mentioned this growing interest on the one half, but then the lack of knowledge. And I remember, because I'm also from Greece and I know Christos, that some years ago, there was a presentation during iDance program. And one of the choreographers, after hearing several presentations, asked how can he collaborate with disabled artists, since he doesn't know where to find them or who they are. And that was like in 2018. I think that things have changed since then, but still there is a huge lack of knowledge, at least. And it's also reflected in the report, and this disparity between North and Western Europe and Southern and Eastern Europe. Thanks. And with Eastern Europe, let's go to Philip. Philip, hi.
Hello, hi, thank you, Bettina. And I will try to also be optimistic, as Christos was. I'm very pleased to be with you today. My name is Filip Pawlak, and I'm connecting with you from Berlin, from Central Europe. But my involvement in Europe Beyond Access is related to Poland, and I will want to tell you about this experience. Sorry about my voice also, it's today. I lost it a bit. I'm working in
You could describe yourself before moving on to...
Yes, I will.
Okay.
I'm a white man in my mid-30s. I have red hair and a beard. My left arm is slightly shorter. I'm wearing a white t-shirt. There is a smooth wall behind me. I have an earring in my right ear. I'm working as a theater producer, curator, but also as an arts and disability consultant, activist, ex-performer for now. And answering the question, I would like to start with the positive impact of the report and similar works, impact on my practice. The report covers the subject very broadly, providing a lot of data that can be helpful in lobbying for a change. Based on the report, we can see that change is possible, that it happens. I'm also using data from report in a more emotional way. We have clear evidence that decision makers really often are ignoring in their research all social group, disabled artists. This emotional argument allows me to indicate it's time to act. And in my context of Eastern Europe, indicate we are staying behind. It's time to work. It's hard not to agree with the conclusions and the recommendations of the report. I can see in my own practice how much there is still to be done, but also how a huge change has taken place in recent years. The number of artists present in the main circulation of the performing arts sector has increased really. In the Polish context, I can see a lot of interest, not only from the curators, but especially from academics and from critical circles. The topic of arts and disability emerged as a part of the broader movement, supporting change in the theater and dance, a movement to stop violent practices, movement as a Me Too and all discussions about violence in theater and the art educational system. It's very important for me that our activities have become an integral part of the movement for a change in the performing arts sector. I'm also really happy with this distinction that is present in Poland right now, and it was not before. We have started to treat lobbying for accessibility for the audience separately and support the development of disabled artists separately. These all actions for artists with disabilities came at a very good time. In Poland, the support of the prestige of a large project such as EBA and its funds allowed for an almost continuous presence of the topic at the largest festivals, discussions, topics of the articles in important media. It may not be evident on the stage right now, but in the most influential theater and dance media, the topic of arts and disability is still prominent. It's only a matter of time before we will see the results of this fully on stage. It's already happening and will become more and more present, I hope. What I miss in the report is the greater focus on where the difference between Eastern and Western Europe comes from. This is a greater reflection of where we start from. What is the starting point in Poland and, for example, in Germany and in the Netherlands? In Poland, as well as in many countries in the East and South of Europe, the system of culture is extremely underfunded. In these conditions, systemic change is very difficult. And in these difficult conditions, I can still see how dynamically and vitally this change takes place. In the Poland, where the basic human rights of people with disabilities are still not respected. So comparing this at the level of data itself with Western Europe gives me a sad impression that this topic in East is not important. But from my Polish experience, I have impression that it's quite an opposite. Of course, there's a lot to be done. But when I'm thinking about the resources we have at our disposal, I'm really proud of the change that has taken in Poland. And also to finish, I think that people in the positions like mine, producing, curating, can use the data from the report as a strong argument for a change. In our practices, we can focus on the positive aspect, indicating the international aspect of cooperation, the fact that it's a movement that will become increasingly important in the upcoming years. and it's worth of being leader of this change. As in many years ago, the queer topic was an innovative and pioneering. Now the disability movement in arts can be just as refreshing and groundbreaking, in my opinion. And this report is really helping with this. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Philip. This sounded like I'm ready for fighting now. And I was also thinking how important it is that we can ground the report on our personal experience and professional experience, I mean, from where we come. Because I think also that Poland and Greece have some common ground as to what is happening in the cultural landscape in general. So thank you very much for your contribution. And now we can move on to Marie Lesur. Marie?
Hello, thank you, Bettina. So my name is Marie Lesur, and I am a white woman in my late 40s. I have mid-long brown hair, and I am wearing a black t-shirt today and with a white background and the logo of On the Move. It's a bit challenging to come at the end because everything somehow has been said in relation with the report, but I guess this was also the aim of On the Move, since we are commissioned by the British Council also to produce this second report, and also like to offer this space of exchange and discussion. And more importantly, as it was said, particularly also with Philip, it's hard to be after Philip after this speech. So also like it's also continuing this time of action as well. What I would like to say, and I think this panel is illustrating this fact to many extent, is that for me, one of the positive aspects also of this report is that compared with the first report, and I have to say the two reports shall really be seen as a complementary and not only as a follow-up, because their scope is a bit different. This one, the second report of Time to Act, has a particular focus also on professional disabled artists, and it has also a particular focus on story of change at national level or regional level. And this is what we heard today as well. There is a particular focus on Poland, Italy, and Sweden, and particularly the Scanner region. And I wanted to emphasize that as well, because of course we need data. It was very much said. After, we can always criticize data, build on data, but we need also qualitative type of data, and we need as well to share some form of stories of change, whatever limitative they can be. I mean, for instance, when we talk about some change at the level of a region, like the Scanner region in Sweden, it doesn't mean that it concerns the whole of the country, or it can be also like related to a particular change focusing on a particular disability, for instance, in the case of the setting up of a national network. But still, this is interesting to see this movement compare with the first report 2 years ago, because these national stories or national network festival project that become more important for the sector to ask resource, to ask a recommendation in terms of disabled artists are also, or can become even stronger place for advocacy at a national level. So I see it also as a positive element. The negative element, I will not come back on it because it has been said many times. This is these huge discrepancies between West, Northern, and Eastern Central country. But here again, it's quite interesting to see that the story that we chose in collaboration with the British Council are also Poland and Italy. So this is also to see the impact that a European project and other form of action at a European level can have, because we are also in a particular moment where we need to rethink the way we create, collaborate, distribute. And in that sense, the recommendation provided by disabled artists and cultural professionals are also very interesting in this mindset on how to have more time to produce, more time for, more space also to create a stronger relation to the audience. So these are also some elements that are also interesting in the rethinking of our system. And last but not least, I try to go very fast, a bit faster also. I'm conscious, aware of the time. What a network like On the Move could take on, also based on the recommendation of this report. I would say also in connection with what was said by Judith Widekock, and it's also referred to one of the key recommendation of the report on how European network platform cooperation project can be also like enabler of change. So for us, we started that. I have to say for the moment, it's quite challenging to identify them, but with our colleague, John Ellingworth, who was also the data analyst for this report, we are trying on our website to identify mobility funding scheme that embed specific support for disabled artists and cultural professionals, and not only specific call for disabled artists and cultural professionals, but I would say mainstream, calls that can access more disabled artists and cultural professionals. There are not so many at the moment, but we do that because, of course, we hope this is helpful for the sector, but that also it's helpful at a policy maker or funders level to show some initiative, because we always need to refer to other type of initiative as well. And last but not least, also to relate to what Judith Widekock was saying, it's not enough to only inform that such schemes, for instance, are accessible and are possible to apply for disabled artists and cultural professionals. And I don't think we need only communication campaign. We need also eventually tailor-made working group session, specific mentoring program as well, not only to follow the process of the application, but also to go beyond. So this is also something that we are looking at also with other partners, network and collaborator. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marie. And I think we chose you to be the last one to talk, because somehow your local experience is the experience of all of us, as you are the On the Move director. And I think it's very important that we do see these two reports as comparative reports, but also that we highlight that everyone who has joined this panel and the previous panel before us has talked about the report, this one and the previous one, as a useful tool. So it means that your amazing work that you all did is useful for everyone in the field. And without notes, we only have like 5 to 10 minutes at most to have a small chat discussion. And my idea was that it would be nice to have your comments on this lack of access to professional cultural education for deaf and disabled artists. That is also highlighted in various parts of the report. It was mentioned by Anna Consolanti. It was a question from Ben towards Judith. And I think that it's something really crucial. And if some of you have a comment and want to really say something about it, now is the time, let's say. So, anyone? Yeah, Philip?
If I can, just a few words. Thank you for this question, Bettina. I think it's really crucial, this education aspect. And I want to maybe share some positive, again, things I'm trying to. Like in Poland, we already started with the Theatre Academy in Warsaw, the process of redesigning the educational plan for actors to allow them to start studying in the faculty of acting. But as I see this process, it's really long. Obviously, we are demanding to have it right now and to start the studies as soon as possible. But also, somehow we need to understand the logic of the university and how complex is the situation. There is a lot of things to be changed, not in the documents or in the legal aspect. It's just with the old professors who have their own practices, how they are teaching, and they need to rethink the ways how they are understanding theater, to be honest. So this is a big aesthetical change that has to take place, and it's happening. So that's the one thing is that's finally happening, and I feel like a lot of allies in the cultural sector. The bad thing is like it's always taking time. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I think Mira wants to add something.
Exactly. Thank you. I agree that this work will take time, but like I stated before, I think we all need to commit ourselves into it and work in a different levels in the local environment with the wide base of artists, and then further on in the national levels, the authorities and the policymakers and so on and so on. So I'm thinking that if everyone would really pragmatically just start doing something about it, the change will happen. So I'm positive about this. It's a little bit same than by demanding the accessible buildings, that we just have to be very brave in by asking the accessibility as a simple example. I think this is a little bit a similar type of a challenge, that small things will make a huge difference.
Thank you. And I can see Kaya and then Marie want to add the discussion. Yes, Kaya?
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned in the research we've done here in Norway, it's clear that education is also the #1 barrier, at least for artists in Norway, and it just starts so early, as my colleague Mira mentioned as well. And the implications, another thing that's, it's not only the education, but the implication that has in terms of networks, in terms of jobs, and all these things are massive. So it'll require this moving out of the silos of the sectors that we really, really need to do, and that is, quite challenging. But in terms of kind of fields of action from the report that we just launched, things like what Philip was mentioning in terms of competence amongst the educators, challenging traditional notions of quality and evaluation criteria, and even the sectors themselves. How do you do the audition settings? There's also some movements in Norway, and I know internationally as well, to while we're waiting to transform these large old structures to create kind of newer international exchanges and learning opportunities, and not to kind of discredit also those kind of alternative educational programs. So while changing the old, then we also can reinvent some newer, smaller scale kind of educational opportunities that I think is interesting. So just a little comment here from our side.
Thank you, Kaya. Marie?
Yeah, thank you, Bettina. Just two small comments as well I wanted to add on this question of professional education. Also, here we are talking, and this is so utterly important, of course, on the question of artists, disabled artists, but also maybe on all the profession related to the artist work, be it a manager, producer, programmer, technician. I mean, that it can be also more open, because it can also widen the scope of understanding and sensibilization about the subject. And the last point, which is also crucial, it's also how to bear in mind on how to bridge the gap between the professional education system and then the working time as well, because often there is this gap between people, artists that are maybe well trained, but after when it comes to find a job, to find opportunities and administrative support for their work, it's much more challenging. And we can imagine that for disabled artists, that would be also that they would need also a particular set of information to bridge this gap, in the best possible manner in order to enter the working environment for them. So this was also one point I wanted to add. Thank you.
Yes, that's also very important. Thank you, Marie. And I think that this cut short discussion on education is really important, because it also has to do with what Mira was saying about For example, a disabled artist like Made having to teach her colleagues, or the fact that the report also states that we are missing experienced disabled professionals, not only artists, in key role positions. And with that note, I would like to thank you all so much for your insightful responses. I am sorry that we have the limited time, but still, that's the time we have. And with that note, I would like to give the floor to Ben Evans once again to present learning journeys. Ben?
Hello there, thank you. And I'm just very grateful for time just at the end of what has been a really interesting discussion, just to share some practical information from Europe Beyond Access. So I hope people don't mind us taking this opportunity. One of the key findings of the original Time to Act and also this current report launched today is around lack of knowledge. And that's one of the reasons that Europe Beyond Access is publishing what we're calling learning journeys. And we're calling them learning journeys aimed at 3 different core audiences. One, of deaf and disabled artists, especially those who have not been able to benefit from the connections and opportunities of Europe Beyond Access. And we acknowledge that deaf and disabled artists tend to be more geographically isolated than their non-disabled peers. We have a learning journey aimed at arts funders and policymakers who are interested in increasing equity in their cultural systems and want to look at tools and best practice, but also one for mainstream promoters, producers, and programmers. We've spoken about Europe Beyond Access on a number of times, and it's important to say that only one of our partners, Pair Art in Serbia, is a specialist arts and disability organization. The rest of us who have taken part in this 5-year project are mainstream organizations. And it is, as Mira said, it has been a huge learning journey for us. So with these tools, we hope to share some of that learning, but also the key learning that disabled artists wanted us to share with those groups. So each of the learning journeys includes films and audio commissioned specifically for this learning journey. It includes presentations, panels, provocations from the 5 years of the Europe Beyond Access program, and it includes recommended external reading, listening, and tools. On screen, I just have an image from one of the films we made, a disabled artist disrupting the museum, filmed at the National Gallery in London. And on screen now, some of the artists who have committed their time to that panel discussion: Chiara Bassani from Italy, Kate Marsh from the UK, Dalibor Sandor from Serbia, and Chisato Minamimura from the UK via Japan. But alongside them, Philip Pawlak from Poland, Mark Brew from the UK via Australia, Diana Nipsa from Portugal, Aristide Rontini from Italy, Katarzyna Zaglicka from Poland, Helena Keke Brown from New Zealand, Edu O from Brazil, and Maria Shoddy from the UK. The learning journey aimed at deaf and disabled artists has been curated by myself and Philip Pawlak, who you've heard from today, and includes questions around disability identity in the arts, aesthetics and artistic approaches, becoming an artist and developing your artistic career, tools and knowledge for working in the professional cultural sector, and discussions around advocacy, a community advocating for change. The learning journey for arts funders and policymakers has other contributions, provocations from artists around disability in the arts, dialogue about disabled artists contributing to art form innovation, a key consideration for arts funders, European research such as Time to Act and cultural policy recommendations, but also case studies of funding bodies who have managed to generate change, examples of dedicated funding programs that successfully have supported disabled artists, examples of where arts funders have insisted on more access in mainstream institutions, and barriers for those policymakers to consider. And finally, for promoters, producers, and programmers, again, provocations to them from our artists in the exploring the relationship between disabled artists and mainstream cultural sector recommended tools and guidance for access for disabled artists and professionals, access for audiences, accessible marketing, and importantly, organizational change. We love doing things all at the same time on Europe Beyond Access. The two learning journeys on deaf and disabled artists and arts funders and policymakers will be published tomorrow. And that for the promoters, producers and programmers will be published on the 15th of June. They'll all be available on europebeyondaccess.com, and you can make sure that you're the first to hear about them by signing up to the newsletter, which is there. Thank you.
Well, Sonia, I think you need to unmute yourself. Or
Thank you, Ben, for this very useful information. And I hope everybody will jump onto the website and check it all out, because the information there is much needed and we can all use it to, I think, also improve what we've been talking about today. And as we've come to the end of our event of today, of the launch of the report, I would like to thank everyone who worked in front and behind the screen, and thank you all for attending this event from all over Europe. We realize that we've heard a lot of different voices and views today, but all those are so needed to bring about change. We need to build an even stronger and bigger community to make sure we are creating a more inclusive cultural scene. The report and its finding will help us, but us humans will have to spread it and use the findings to really, really act. With just words, we're not going to make it. Also, let us not use like the lack of budget as an excuse to not try and work in an inclusive way. It's every time looking at a new situation with open eyes and an open mind. We cannot expect people to always adapt to what is there. We have to create new spaces and situations which are accessible for us all. I would like to thank you all so much on behalf of Bettina and myself, and we hope we will meet up soon somewhere again.
thank you.